Now, on Saturday, July 18, Andrew Tate was arrested in Miami by the U.S. Marshals Service as British authorities moved to have him extradited to the United Kingdom. But this was not simply another temporary arrest. According to the Crown Prosecution Service, the government agency responsible for bringing criminal cases in England and Wales, Tate now faces 42 charges in the UK, 32 of them newly authorized, and the allegations against him have become significantly more serious. Now, I'm sure most people are familiar with the name Andrew Tate. Tate exploded across the internet a few years ago by promoting an unapologetically hypermasculine lifestyle built around money, discipline, status, and male dominance. Some people viewed his message as motivation for young men who felt lost or ignored, while others criticized him for repeatedly making degrading and inflammatory statements about women. Either way, his influence became impossible to ignore. Millions of young men began watching his content, repeating his phrases, and treating him as a voice for a generation that felt mainstream culture had abandoned them. But Andrew Tate is also no stranger to legal trouble. In December 2022, he and his brother, Tristan, were arrested in Romania during an investigation involving allegations of human trafficking, rape, and operating an organized criminal group. They were later formally charged, spent time in detention and house arrest, and have consistently denied the allegations against them. Now, this recent arrest is particularly interesting because, like we said, this is not the first time Andrew Tate has found himself in custody. The difference is that this arrest happened in Miami, involved U.S. Marshals, and is connected to an effort by British authorities to extradite him to the United Kingdom, where the number of charges he faces has increased dramatically. So let's look at the specifics of what is really going on here. On Saturday, July 18, Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan were arrested in Miami by the U.S. Marshals Service. The brothers, who hold both American and British citizenship, were taken into custody under a sealed federal warrant as part of extradition proceedings initiated by the United Kingdom. And because the warrant was sealed, American authorities did not initially release the full court documents or publicly explain the details of the arrest. The Crown Prosecution Service later confirmed that the brothers had been arrested in the United States and were awaiting extradition proceedings. According to media reports, Andrew was expected to appear at a boxing event around the time he was taken into custody. Instead, both brothers now face a federal court process that will determine whether they can be surrendered to the British authorities. This is important because they were not arrested over allegations that they committed a new crime in Miami. The U.S. Marshals detained them because Britain, the UK, is seeking their extradition over criminal charges connected to alleged conduct in England. And British prosecutors say they have authorized 38 additional charges against the brothers after receiving a further file of evidence from Bedfordshire police. Andrew Tate alone faces 32 of those new charges: 7 counts of rape, 3 counts of arranging or facilitating trafficking for sexual exploitation, 3 counts of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and 19 charges related to indecent images of a child and extreme pornography. Those are in addition to the 10 UK charges previously authorized against Andrew Tate, bringing his total to 42 charges. Tristan faces 6 additional charges on top of 11 previously authorized charges, bringing his individual total to 17. Combined, the brothers now face 59 UK charges involving 7 alleged victims. The alleged offenses are said to have occurred between July 2010 and August 2017. And just to be abundantly clear, these are allegations. They haven't been found guilty. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service itself has emphasized that its role is to determine whether charges should be presented to a criminal court, while guilt or innocence can only be decided through the actual court process. Both Andrew and his brother Tristan deny wrongdoing. Their American attorney, Joseph McBride, has argued that the case is politically motivated and claimed that the latest charges were designed to undermine defamation lawsuits the brothers filed in the United States. He said the defense expects the brothers to be released once a judge reviews the evidence and legitimacy of the extradition request. Now, the UK attempting to extradite them is not entirely new. British authorities obtained European arrest warrants for Andrew and Tristan in 2024. A Romanian court later ruled that they could eventually be extradited to Britain, but only after the separate Romanian proceedings against them were completed. And that distinction is important. The Romanian and British cases involve separate allegations, different alleged victims, and different legal systems. They are not one combined prosecution. However, the legal restrictions in Romania previously affected when Britain could physically obtain custody of the brothers. Now that Andrew and Tristan are in the United States, the UK is attempting to bring them back through the American extradition system instead. So in simple terms, the British authorities are saying that further evidence has expanded the case significantly. What previously involved 21 combined charges and 3 alleged victims has now grown to 59 combined charges involving 7 alleged victims. But the Miami arrest does not automatically mean the brothers will be sent to England, and the American judge will not be deciding whether they are guilty of the underlying allegations. The U.S. proceedings are primarily about whether Britain's request satisfies American law and the extradition treaty between the two countries. If a federal court certifies that the brothers are eligible for extradition, the final decision on whether to surrender them would move to the U.S. Secretary of State. So, Andrew Tate and his brother are in a whole lot of shit. Now, the most interesting thing about this particular arrest is that Andrew has spent much of the past year presenting himself as increasingly free and confident that the cases against him were beginning to fall apart. After their international travel restriction was lifted, Andrew Tate and Tristan were able to travel to the United States and other locations while still remaining subject to ongoing legal proceedings in Romania. To many of his supporters, that created the impression that he had survived the worst of his legal problems and that the cases were gradually collapsing. However, this particular situation introduces something much more serious: a formal attempt by one country to force another country to surrender him for prosecution. Extradition is not simply a police department asking Andrew Tate to voluntarily return to England. It is a legal process in which the British government must persuade the American courts that its request satisfies the requirements of the extradition treaty between the two countries. At the time of recording this, Andrew and Tristan have not been extradited. The arrest begins that process. It does not determine its outcome, and an American court will examine whether the request is legally sufficient, and any eventual surrender would still require additional steps through the United States government. But if they are eventually extradited, they could be transported to England and required to face the criminal proceedings attached to all these charges. That would place Andrew in a much more restrictive position than simply moving around the United States while publicly denying the allegations. Now, a large part of Andrew Tate's audience believes that these allegations are politically motivated. So the general argument from his supporters is that Andrew Tate became too influential, encouraged young men to reject mainstream culture, and was therefore targeted by governments and powerful institutions that wanted to silence him. And that belief is closely connected to the way Andrew has branded himself throughout his rise. For anyone who has heard Andrew Tate speak, Andrew has positioned himself as someone standing outside and fighting against what he calls the Matrix. And he uses that phrase to describe a system of governments, media organizations, corporations, and cultural institutions that he claims manipulate ordinary people and punish individuals who become too independent or too influential. So from Andrew's perspective, every new investigation, arrest, or attempt to restrict his movement becomes further evidence that the system is trying to destroy him. And his American attorney has continued that framing, describing the latest British charges as politically motivated and arguing that American authorities should not assist Britain with what the defense considers an abusive prosecution. And that attorney says the brothers are innocent and expects them to be released once a judge examines the extradition request. And this is where it's important to separate his interpretation of events from what has actually been established. It is completely fair to report that Andrew Tate and his legal team believe he is being politically persecuted. That's their side, right? And it's also fair to explain why his audience finds that argument believable. But their belief does not by itself prove that the charges were manufactured or that multiple governments are coordinating to silence him. On the other side, the existence of 42 charges does not prove that Andrew Tate committed them either, because these are allegations at this point, right? And the British authorities, of course, have specifically emphasized that authorizing charges is not a finding of guilt. That can, of course, only be determined by a court after the evidence and defense are heard. So from his side, Andrew Tate sees this as another chapter in a political campaign against him. From the prosecution side, the British authorities say they received additional evidence involving 4 more alleged victims, expanded the case accordingly, and are now attempting to bring him before a British court. Those two narratives are going to collide directly during the extradition process. But personally, I believe some of what Andrew Tate describes as the Matrix attacking him may instead be reality catching up with a man who spent years publicly describing some extremely questionable behavior. Now, that is my personal interpretation. and it does not prove any of the criminal charges against him. Now, for anyone who's not really familiar with how Andrew originally claimed to have made a significant portion of his money, one of his earliest major businesses involved women performing on adult webcam websites. So according to Andrew Tate's own accounts, he and his brother recruited women to appear on camera while the brothers managed the business behind the scenes. Tate has repeatedly portrayed the operation as extremely profitable, although many of his claims about its size and earnings have never been independently verified. The numbers that he said, I believe it was around 600,000 that he claimed that he made a month from this business. Those numbers have never really been independently verified. So we don't really know if it's true. Now, reporting from people familiar with Romania's webcam industry has questioned whether the operation was ever as large or profitable as Andrew Tate himself claimed. But what makes this relevant is not simply that Andrew Tate operated an adult webcam business. It is the way he publicly bragged about running it.
So what I did is I unplugged their keyboards. So the chicks would sit there and hit a keyboard that wasn't plugged in. Some staff I trained would do all the talking.
Now, in the interview clip I just played you, Andrew Tate was explaining that the women appearing on camera were not always the people typing messages to the customers. He claimed that he and Tristan, his brother, and members of their staff would communicate with the men while pretending to be the women on screen. And according to Andrew Tate himself, they would disconnect the women's keyboards and control the conversation from behind the screen. The women would provide the visual performance, while the men running the business constructed romantic stories designed to keep customers emotionally invested and spending money. Tate openly described telling different customers whatever they most wanted to hear. Now, in Andrew Tate's own words, the entire strategy was to sell the dream.
Sell the dream, sell the dream, sell the dream. We got to the point where we had these guys falling in love with my models, serious, big time in love, sending crazy money.
He claimed that some customers became convinced that they were in genuine relationships with these models. And Tate himself, he described men spending their entire savings, taking out loans, and in at least one alleged case, sending approximately $1 million. Again, those specific financial amounts are Tate's own claims and have not been independently confirmed. He then described creating excuses whenever customers asked to meet the women in person. And according to Tate, some men were told that the women needed money for visa, flights, accommodation, or proof of funds before she could travel.
I need a visa. Okay, get a visa. I need money for a visa. Go to the embassy, take a picture outside the embassy, boom, come back. They rejected my visa. They said we have to wait 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they'll give it to me.
After receiving the money, the supposed meeting would repeatedly be delayed or canceled. Andrew Tate even explained how his team would intentionally provoke customers into becoming angry, then use that anger as a reason for the women to cut contact. After enough time had passed, he claimed the customers would often return, apologize, and begin spending money again. So this is not me speculating. This is what Andrew Tate himself said on camera, and he laughed, boasting about the methods he claimed were used to extract money from emotionally vulnerable men. Now, it's very important for me to not make an inaccurate legal connection here. Andrew Tate's comments about the webcam operation that I'm telling you about do not automatically prove any of the rape, trafficking, or assault allegations he currently faces. The criminal charges must be decided according to the specific evidence in those cases. And Tate, of course, denies all wrongdoing. But these clips of Andrew Tate speaking about this, they do give important context, and they definitely go against what Andrew Tate himself and his supporters say as far as every negative claim about him being invented by the media or created entirely because of his political influence or supposed political influence, because I don't really know that. Does Andrew Tate have political influence? I don't really know because I don't know enough about him. I'll just say supposed or alleged political influence. So long before these latest charges were announced, Andrew Tate publicly presented himself as someone who recruited women into adult content businesses, controlled the conversations happening under their identities, and manipulated male customers into believing they had genuine romantic relationships. And he appeared to be pretty proud of it. So when I say that reality may be catching up with Andrew Tate, I'm not saying that these old clips prove every criminal charge against him. I'm saying that it goes against what he says that he believes in, or what he's told a lot of these men who follow him that he believes in. Now, one thing Andrew Tate is extremely good at is he's really good at controlling the way people interpret what happens to him. He knows how to position himself as the man who saw everything coming, the man who challenged the system, became too powerful, and is now being punished for exposing the truth. So whenever something happens to Andrew Tate, whether it's an arrest, a restriction, or another investigation, it can immediately be folded into the same story. The Matrix is attacking him because it is afraid of him. And for many of the young men who follow him, that explanation has become almost impossible to challenge. They do not simply view Andrew as an entertainer or internet personality. They see him as somebody who gave them confidence, motivated them to improve their lives, and said things they felt nobody else was willing to say. You have to keep in mind that a lot of these men that Andrew Tate speaks to, they feel as if though he's the only person who's speaking for them. That's how they feel. Right or wrong, that's how they personally feel about him. And that emotional connection is exactly why so many of them are prepared to defend him before they've even examined the evidence. And the sad part is, I think a lot of these young men have been led astray. Because here's the thing, Andrew Tate can tell a young man to work hard, become disciplined, get in shape, and stop making excuses. And that's, objectively speaking, that's a good message, right? But when that same audience may begin believing that because some of his advice helped him, every allegation against him must automatically be false. And those are two completely different things. A person can say something motivational and still behave terribly in other areas of their life. A person can correctly identify problems affecting people, in this case, young men, and still use those problems to build loyalty around himself in order to shield himself from consequences. And somebody helping you in one way does not mean you should abandon your ability to question them. This is where I believe Andrew Tate has been most effective, because he didn't just build an audience. He built an entire framework where supporting him feels like supporting yourself, while questioning him feels like siding with the people who supposedly want young men to remain weak. But eventually, branding can only protect you for so long. I think this arrest could become extremely serious for him because it demonstrates how fragile his freedom actually is. For a while, Andrew Tate has been able to travel, make public appearances, and present himself as somebody who had effectively survived these cases. But now it looks like things are changing for him. So at this point, the question is no longer simply whether Andrew Tate walks out of custody this week. The bigger question is how long can he continue moving around the world as though none of these cases can truly hurt him. Now, Andrew obviously has access to a significant amount of money that allows him to hire experienced attorneys, challenge decisions, file appeals, and fight these cases for far longer than the average person ever could. But money does not make legal problems disappear. It can buy time, it can buy representation, it can give somebody more options, but when you're facing separate proceedings across multiple countries, additional alleged victims, and dozens of charges, eventually the legal pressure begins to accumulate, and that might be the real danger for Andrew Tate. Andrew spent years convincing the world that he is always in control. But this latest arrest is another reminder that regardless of how confidently he speaks online, he does not control what the American courts decide, what British prosecutors pursue, or how the separate cases surrounding him ultimately unfold. But that is just my personal opinion. What do you guys think? If you made it this far, drop a like on this video. Subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blackie Speaks. Nice to meet you. I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say about this entire Andrew Tate situation. Y'all let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. Shout out to England, the UK.